When we talk about cheating, most people rush to the scandal, the betrayal, the act itself, but very few stop to ask why. What drives a woman, who once loved deeply, to step outside the boundaries of her commitment? What makes her risk everything, her relationship, her reputation, her sense of self, for something fleeting, something forbidden? Cheating is often misunderstood as a purely physical act driven by lust or boredom, but in truth, it's far more complex and emotionally layered, especially when it comes to women. Female infidelity is rarely about the desire for another body, it's about the yearning for emotional recognition, validation, or fulfillment that has been missing for too long. When a woman cheats, it's not necessarily because she wants someone new, it's often because she wants to feel something new. The act of betrayal begins long before any physical line is crossed. It begins in the quiet moments of disconnection, in the growing silence where emotional needs go unheard and unacknowledged. Over time, this absence builds a void that she starts to fill with fantasies, attention from others, or even simple words that remind her of her worth. For many women, emotional neglect feels heavier than any material deprivation. When her efforts go unnoticed, her emotions dismissed, or her voice ignored, she begins to drift inwardly. That's when emotional infidelity starts to take root, the secret conversations, the longing glances, the mental comparisons. She isn't necessarily seeking another man, she's searching for a reflection of herself that feels alive, valued, and desired again. What society often calls cheating is sometimes the visible symptom of a much deeper, hidden emotional starvation. It's not about betrayal at first, it's about escape. Escape from monotony, invisibility, and emotional indifference. Men often perceive cheating as an act of betrayal rooted in selfishness, but if they could look beneath the surface, they'd find pain, confusion, and unmet needs rather than pure deceit. Women crave connection. They want to be seen not just as partners or caretakers but as individuals with emotions, desires, and dreams. When that recognition fades, she begins to feel emotionally homeless in her own relationship. And in that loneliness, attention from someone else becomes intoxicating, not because it's forbidden, but because it feels like oxygen after suffocating silence. This doesn't justify infidelity, but it explains how emotional neglect can quietly transform into vulnerability. Understanding this emotional depth doesn't mean excusing the act of cheating. Rather, it invites empathy and awareness. When men begin to see cheating not merely as a moral failure but as a signal, a cry from a neglected emotional space, they can start addressing the underlying causes rather than just the consequences. Emotional neglect, when left unresolved, becomes the silent architect of distance, resentment, and ultimately betrayal. The truth is, many affairs are less about seeking pleasure and more about seeking presence, the feeling of being emotionally noticed, touched, and valued in ways that had long disappeared from the relationship. Infidelity does not appear out of nowhere. It emerges from the invisible tensions and unspoken dynamics that exist within a relationship. Every affair, especially when committed by a woman, is a revelation of what has been missing, the words unsaid, the feelings unacknowledged, the distance quietly growing between two people. It is not simply about attraction to another person, but a symptom of something deeper that has long been ignored. When communication fades, when emotional intimacy turns into routine politeness, and when partners stop truly seeing each other, the relationship begins to starve in silence. It is in that silence that emotional detachment takes root, slowly shaping the space for betrayal to occur. Cheating, then, becomes not just a violation of trust but an exposure of what was already broken beneath the surface. In many cases, a woman's act of infidelity reveals the emotional imbalance that has been building in the relationship over time. Perhaps she has been the emotional caretaker, always giving, listening, and understanding, while her own needs went unspoken or unmet. Perhaps she has been longing for connection but feels emotionally invisible beside her partner. These subtle dynamics, power imbalances, lack of empathy, emotional avoidance, form the unseen foundation upon which infidelity eventually rests. When a woman steps outside the relationship, consciously or unconsciously, she is often responding to the absence of emotional reciprocity. The affair is not always about falling in love with someone new but about reconnecting with the lost parts of herself that the relationship failed to nurture. For men, recognizing these hidden dynamics is not about accepting blame but about understanding the emotional landscape that exists between two people. Every relationship carries unspoken contracts, expectations, roles, and assumptions that shape how love and attention are exchanged. When these contracts become unbalanced or ignored, one partner begins to feel unseen or unfulfilled, and that feeling quietly erodes intimacy. The woman who cheats may not be seeking excitement as much as she is seeking emotional equilibrium, a space where her feelings are acknowledged and her presence is truly felt. Infidelity, therefore, becomes a language of the unspoken. It is the expression of needs that were never voiced, of emotions that were dismissed, and of pain that was too quiet to be noticed. The act itself might be shocking, but the roots are often planted in years of emotional distance and lack of communication. When a woman betrays, it exposes not just her actions but the deeper fractures within the relationship that made betrayal possible in the first place. It's a mirror reflecting what was unseen, the hidden dynamics that silently govern love, trust, and connection between two people. A woman's betrayal rarely begins with a physical act. It often starts long before that, in silence, emotional withdrawal, and moments where she begins to feel unseen. The slow drift away from her partner is subtle at first, almost invisible. She might still show up, still smile, still care for her responsibilities, but internally, something begins to fade. The connection that once felt alive now feels heavy with routine. Conversations that used to bring excitement now circle around the same practical matters, leaving no room for emotional depth or intimacy. This is how emotional infidelity takes shape, not through dramatic arguments or explosive moments, but through quiet disconnection. She begins to emotionally detach not because she stops loving, but because she no longer feels loved in the way she needs. This emotional withdrawal creates space in her heart that was once filled with closeness. When that space remains empty for too long, it becomes vulnerable. She starts seeking meaning elsewhere, not necessarily in another person at first, but in thoughts, memories, or fantasies where she feels seen again. It could be the warmth of a simple conversation, a compliment that feels genuine, or attention that makes her feel alive. These seemingly small interactions can become emotional anchors for her because they fill the gap her relationship has left unattended. Slowly, without even realizing it, her emotional world begins to shift away from her partner and toward the source of this newfound validation. Men often fail to notice these early signs because they focus on the visible aspects of the relationship, the daily routines, shared responsibilities, physical togetherness. But what truly keeps a woman connected is emotional intimacy, and when that fades, physical presence alone cannot sustain the bond. She might stop sharing her dreams, stop confiding her fears, or stop reaching out for comfort. These are not signs of disinterest, they are quiet cries for connection that often go unheard. By the time the betrayal happens, she has already emotionally left long ago. Understanding this slow emotional withdrawal is crucial because it exposes how infidelity grows not from sudden impulses but from long-term emotional neglect. A woman rarely cheats out of cold calculation. More often, it's a culmination of feeling lonely within her own relationship. When she begins to feel emotionally invisible, she starts searching for a reflection of herself somewhere else, in someone's eyes, in someone's words, or simply in the way another person makes her feel valued again. This emotional absence, left unaddressed, becomes the silent beginning of betrayal, where the heart leaves first, long before the body ever does. When a man discovers that a woman has been unfaithful, his first instinct is often to see it as a personal attack, an act of rejection that strikes at his pride and identity. But to truly understand the deeper reasons behind female infidelity, one must look beyond the surface of betrayal and into the emotional complexity beneath it. Cheating is not always about desire for someone new, it can be a reflection of unmet emotional needs, unresolved pain, or a loss of connection that neither partner fully understood. For men, learning to interpret infidelity through the lens of awareness rather than anger allows for personal growth and emotional evolution. It opens the door to self-reflection and helps them understand what might have been missing not only in their relationship but also within themselves. A woman's choice to cheat often emerges from emotional neglect rather than a lack of love. When she feels unseen, unheard, or unappreciated for too long, she begins to seek what she has lost, not necessarily a new partner, but a new emotional experience. This doesn't mean she doesn't care for her man, it means she no longer feels emotionally safe or fulfilled with him. For men, This realization can be painful because it challenges traditional ideas of loyalty and masculinity. Many men are conditioned to view love as something proven through provision or protection, yet what many women crave most is emotional presence, the ability to be truly seen, to be understood without judgment, to feel that her emotions matter. When this emotional bridge collapses, the relationship becomes a hollow structure held together by habit rather than intimacy. A man may think everything is fine because there are no visible conflicts, but beneath the calm lies a woman quietly drifting away. Her betrayal, when it happens, exposes that hidden emotional distance. Instead of focusing solely on the act of infidelity, a man who chooses awareness will begin to ask deeper questions. What was she trying to express through this? What was missing that neither of us addressed? What does this reveal about how we've been connecting or failing to connect? This kind of emotional maturity transforms pain into understanding. It doesn't excuse betrayal but reframes it as a signal, a reflection of what was lost between two people who once loved each other deeply. When a man can view cheating not as an insult but as information, he gains power over his emotional reactions. He begins to see that awareness, not blame, is what leads to growth. Because true strength lies not in punishing betrayal but in understanding the silence that preceded it and the emotional needs that were left unanswered. Healing and prevention after infidelity are not built on punishment or control, they are built on courage, the courage to face painful truths, to listen without defending, and to communicate without fear. When cheating happens, most couples either collapse under the weight of blame or rush to move on without ever addressing the deeper issues that caused the fracture. But healing does not come from forgetting, it comes from understanding. To truly rebuild, both partners must be willing to step into honesty, vulnerability, and emotional intelligence. This means learning to talk about what really happened beneath the surface, not just who did what, but why it happened, what emotional needs were missing, and how disconnection was allowed to grow unnoticed. For a man, this process demands emotional awareness. It requires him to look beyond the pain of betrayal and see the human story behind it. Instead of asking, "How could she do this?" the more transformative question is, "What have we both been avoiding?" Infidelity is rarely the beginning of a relationship's downfall, it's often the final expression of neglect, silence, or unresolved tension. Facing these truths is uncomfortable because it forces both partners to confront their emotional blind spots. But that discomfort is where growth begins. Healing, in this sense, is not about returning to what the relationship used to be, it's about creating something deeper, more conscious, and emotionally honest than before. Prevention, too, lies in emotional connection. Many relationships begin with passion but lose intimacy as partners stop nurturing their bond. Communication becomes transactional, affection becomes routine, and emotional curiosity fades. To prevent infidelity, both people must actively keep their connection alive through honesty, through presence, and through a willingness to express needs before they turn into resentment. Emotional intelligence is not about controlling your partner's actions, it's about understanding your own emotional patterns and being aware of how they affect the relationship. When both partners cultivate that awareness, they build a space where honesty feels safer than secrecy and vulnerability feels stronger than pride. Courage also means accepting that healing will not be instant. Trust takes time to rebuild, and forgiveness is not the same as forgetting. It is a choice, made repeatedly, to move forward with openness rather than suspicion. For men, the path toward healing after betrayal is not found in control or vengeance but in connection, the kind that is rooted in empathy and communication. When both partners learn to speak from a place of truth rather than fear, they not only repair what was broken but also create a love that is wiser, more resilient, and far more authentic than before.